Wendy's hands trembled as she stood in the conference room, her own conference room, staring at the faces of people she had hired, trained, and trusted. Williams, her husband of 8 years, sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression she had learned to fear. Beside him, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, smiling like a woman who had just won a war. Effective immediately, Vanessa announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Wendy will be reassigned to administrative support. We need team players, not people who think they're above the organization. The junior staff shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Wendy's vision blurred, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She clutched the leather folder against her chest, the one containing documents that could end this humiliation in seconds. But something stopped her. She needed to see how far Williams would go. How completely he would betray the woman who had given him everything. Williams finally spoke, his voice cold and final. It's for the best, Wendy. Maybe now you'll learn what it means to support your husband instead of competing with him. Wendy walked out of that room knowing one truth. Her marriage was already dead. She just hadn't buried it yet. Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake. Now let us continue. 8 years. That's how long Wendy had been carrying Williams on her back, while he convinced himself he was walking on his own. When they married, Wendy was already building something extraordinary. Fresh from her master's degree in business administration, she had used her late father's inheritance and a small loan from her uncle to establish Meridian Holdings, a consulting firm that specialized in financial restructuring for mid-sized companies across West Africa. Within 3 years, the company was generating millions. Within 5, it had offices in Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi. But Wendy's mother, Mama Ruth, had warned her about men and money. A man's pride is fragile, she'd said during one of their long Sunday afternoon conversations. If you want peace in your marriage, let him believe he's leading. Let him feel like the provider, even when you're the one paying the bills. So Wendy created a structure. She placed Meridian Holdings under a family trust, appointed a managing director named Samuel Okonkwo to be the public face of the company, and took a position as senior finance director. On paper, she was just another high-earning executive. In reality, every major decision flowed through her. Every hire, every contract, every expansion, it all required her signature. Williams worked at Meridian too, though he didn't know his wife owned it. He was a mid-level operations manager, competent enough but unremarkable. He earned well, drove a nice car, lived in a beautiful home in Lekki, and sent money to his mother in Enugu every month. What he didn't know was that Wendy paid his salary. Wendy bought his car. Wendy owned the house where he rested his head every night. For years it worked. Williams seemed content. They had their struggles, what marriage didn't? But nothing Wendy couldn't manage. She told herself the lies were necessary, protective, that revealing the truth would shatter the delicate balance they'd built. Then the resentment started seeping through the cracks. You know what Richard said to me today? Williams muttered one evening, scrolling through his phone while Wendy prepared dinner. He said his wife just had a baby and quit her job to focus on the family. He said a real woman knows when to step back and let her husband lead. Wendy paused, knife hovering over the tomatoes. And what did you say? I told him my wife is too busy impressing her bosses to think about things like that. The bitterness in his voice made her chest tighten. Williams, I work hard for our future. For us. For us. He finally looked up, his eyes sharp with something Wendy couldn't quite name. Or for yourself. Because from where I'm standing you're doing fine. I'm the one people pity. Poor Williams, his wife earns more than him. His wife drives a better car. His wife. Do you know how that feels? Wendy set the knife down carefully. I've never made you feel small. You don't have to. Your success does it for you. That conversation haunted her for weeks. She tried to pull back at work, deflect praise, downplay her achievements in social settings. She wore simpler clothes to family gatherings. She let Williams tell stories about his company's successes, even when she was the architect behind them. But it wasn't enough. The poison had already entered their marriage, and it had a name, Vanessa. Wendy first noticed her at the company's quarterly strategy meeting 6 months ago. Young, ambitious, sharp-tongued, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Williams had hired her as his personal assistant, praising her initiative and fresh perspective. Wendy had approved the hire without a second thought. She trusted Williams. She believed in their marriage. The late-night phone calls started 3 months later. Williams claimed they were work emergencies, budget reports, client complaints, urgent presentations. Wendy wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she ignored the perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his shirts. She ignored the sudden password on his phone. She ignored the way he flinched when she touched him. Until the night she couldn't ignore it anymore. Williams was in the shower when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Wendy glanced at the screen and saw a message from V. Her heart knew before her mind did. She unlocked the phone. His password was their wedding anniversary, a detail that would later feel like mockery, and read the messages. V, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Tonight was perfect. Williams, you make me feel like a man again. Not like some accessory to my wife's success. V, you deserve better. A woman who knows her place. Who lifts you up instead of standing in your shadow. Williams soon. Promise. Just need to figure out the right timing. Wendy's hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She heard the shower turn off and quickly placed it back on the nightstand. When Williams emerged, towel wrapped around his waist, whistling softly, Wendy pretended to be asleep. But she wasn't sleeping. She was deciding. And the part of her that still believed in the man she married made a choice that would haunt her. She would stay silent. She would wait. She would give him a chance to come back to her on his own. It was the last mistake she would make for Williams's sake. Vanessa Okoro was a woman who understood power, or at least she thought she did. At 28, she had learned that the fastest way to rise in a male-dominated corporate world wasn't through hard work alone. It was through proximity to men who made decisions. And Williams, bitter and bruised by his wife's success, was exactly the kind of man she could mold. Their affair had started innocently enough. Late nights reviewing budget projections. Shared frustrations about office politics. Vanessa listened in ways Williams claimed Wendy didn't. She laughed at his jokes. She asked for his advice. She made him feel important. You're wasting your potential, Vanessa told him one evening in his office, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. You should be leading strategy meetings, not taking orders from your wife's department. She's not my boss, Williams said, though his defensiveness betrayed him. Isn't she, though? Vanessa moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Everyone knows she's the real power at Meridian. You're brilliant, Williams. But as long as you're in her shadow, no one will see it. The seed was planted. Over the following weeks, Vanessa watered it carefully. She found articles about marriages where women out-earned their husbands and the statistical strain it caused. She pointed out moments when Wendy received praise Williams thought he deserved. She reframed every interaction through the lens of disrespect and emasculation. A real man leads, Vanessa said one night, lying in Williams's arms in a hotel room across town. Your wife has forgotten that. Someone needs to remind her. What are you suggesting? Vanessa sat up, her eyes gleaming with calculated malice. You have influence at Meridian. Use it. Show her what it feels like to be diminished, to be overlooked, to be small. Williams hesitated. Some part of him, the part that remembered loving Wendy, the part that remembered their wedding vows, resisted. But Vanessa was skilled at reading men, and she knew exactly which wounds to press. Unless you're afraid of her, she added softly, turning away. Unless you're content being the man people pity. That did it. Williams's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid of anyone. The plan came together over the next month. Williams began documenting what he called performance issues. Times when Wendy left meetings early for personal calls. Instances when her reports were submitted hours before deadline instead of days. Moments when she disagreed with senior management. None of it was genuine misconduct. It was the normal rhythm of a busy executive's life. But Williams framed it as evidence of declining commitment and professional instability. Vanessa helped him craft the narrative. Together, they built a case that painted Wendy as someone who had risen beyond her competence, someone whose attitude was affecting team morale, someone who needed to be recalibrated. They approached Samuel Okonkwo, the managing director, with their concerns. Samuel, a thoughtful man in his 50s who had worked with Wendy since Meridian's founding, listened with growing alarm. "These are serious allegations," Samuel said carefully, studying the documents Williams had prepared. "But I know Wendy. She's one of our most dedicated executives." "With respect, sir," Vanessa interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "Sometimes personal relationships cloud professional judgment. We're not questioning her dedication. We're questioning whether her current role is the right fit." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew something Williams and Vanessa didn't, that Wendy was his actual employer. But he also knew Wendy well enough to recognize when she was testing someone. She had mentioned Williams's growing resentment in their private meetings. She had asked Samuel to allow situations to unfold naturally, to see who her husband truly was when given the opportunity. "I'll take this under advisement," Samuel said finally. "These matters require careful consideration." Williams left the meeting feeling triumphant. Vanessa celebrated with him that night, promising him that soon, very soon, the power dynamic in his marriage would shift. What neither of them knew was that Samuel had walked directly to Wendy's private office, the one not listed in the company directory, and informed her of everything. Wendy had sat in silence for a long time, staring at the framed photo on her desk. It was from their wedding day. Williams in his tailored suit, Wendy in her white dress, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. They looked so young, so hopeful, so unaware of the betrayal that would come. "Let them proceed," Wendy said finally, her voice hollow. "I need to know how far he'll go." Samuel looked troubled. "Wendy, this could damage your reputation in the short term. People will talk. Let them talk. I've built this company on truth and hard work. Williams has built his pride on lies and my silence. It's time everyone sees which foundation is stronger." 3 weeks later, Williams received the approval he'd been waiting for. Samuel, following Wendy's instructions, authorized a departmental restructuring that would result in Wendy's demotion from senior finance director to administrative support coordinator. The announcement would be made publicly, in front of the entire operations team. Williams insisted on it. He wanted everyone to see. He wanted Wendy to feel the humiliation he claimed to have carried for years. On the night before the meeting, Williams came home late, smelling of Vanessa's perfume. Wendy was in the living room, reading a book on corporate governance. She looked up when he entered, her face unreadable. "Big day tomorrow," Williams said, loosening his tie. "Is it?" Wendy's voice was calm. "Restructuring announcement. Should make things more efficient around the office." He paused, waiting for her to ask questions. When she didn't, he added, "Some people are getting new roles. More appropriate roles." Wendy closed her book slowly. "Williams, do you love me?" The question caught him off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. "Do you love me?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You're my wife." That's not an answer. Williams grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, avoiding her eyes. "You know I do. But love isn't just feelings, Wendy. It's respect. It's partnership. It's letting your husband be the man. And I haven't let you be the man? You've made it impossible." The words came out sharper than he intended, fueled by months of Vanessa's whispers and his own bruised ego. "Tomorrow things change. Maybe then you'll understand what marriage is supposed to look like." Wendy watched him walk upstairs to their bedroom. She didn't follow. Instead, she sat in the darkness of their living room, mourning a marriage that had died long before either of them had the courage to admit it. Tomorrow would bring truth. And truth, Wendy had learned, was the most unforgiving teacher. The conference room was packed. Williams had made sure of it. He'd sent calendar invites to the entire operations division, 43 people total, framing the meeting as a critical strategic update. Managers, coordinators, analysts, even administrative assistants filled the chairs and lined the walls. Wendy arrived exactly on time, carrying only her leather portfolio and a small handbag. She wore a simple navy dress and minimal jewelry. Several colleagues greeted her with warm smiles. A few looked uncomfortable, as if they'd heard whispers of what was coming. Williams sat at the head of the conference table, Vanessa positioned strategically to his right. They had coordinated their outfits, Williams in a charcoal suit, Vanessa in a crimson blouse that demanded attention. They looked like executives. They looked like power. Samuel Okonkwo stood near the back of the room, his face carefully neutral. His eyes met Wendy's briefly, a silent question in them. "Are you sure?" Wendy gave the slightest nod. She was sure. "Thank you all for coming," Williams began, standing to address the room. His voice carried the confidence of a man who believed he was about to reclaim his dignity. "As you know, Meridian Holdings is committed to operational excellence. That requires having the right people in the right roles. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions." Wendy sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. She could feel the eyes on her. The curiosity, the pity, the uncomfortable excitement that came with watching someone else's downfall. After careful review, Williams continued, "We've identified some structural inefficiencies in our finance division. Specifically, we've noticed that leadership responsibilities have been misaligned with actual performance and organizational needs." Vanessa took her cue, standing to distribute printed packets around the table. "These documents outline the new organizational structure," she said, her heels clicking deliberately as she moved around the room. "You'll notice several changes designed to improve accountability and team cohesion." When she reached Wendy, Vanessa placed the packet down with just enough force to make a sound. Their eyes met. Vanessa's smile was subtle but unmistakable. She was enjoying this. Williams cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Wendy Adeyemi will transition from Senior Finance Director to Administrative Support Coordinator. This role will allow her to focus on foundational tasks while others with more appropriate leadership qualities take on strategic responsibilities." The room went silent. Someone gasped. A few people glanced at Wendy, then quickly looked away. The humiliation was designed to be complete, public, irreversible. But Williams wasn't finished. "I know some of you may find this surprising," he said, his voice taking on a tone of false sympathy. "But leadership isn't about titles or tenure. It's about attitude. It's about being a team player. It's about knowing your place in the larger organizational structure." He looked directly at Wendy. "Some people forget that marriage, like business, requires supporting your partner, not competing with them, not trying to outshine them. Maybe this change will help restore some much-needed balance, both professionally and personally." The room's energy shifted. People weren't just uncomfortable anymore. They were shocked. Williams had just publicly connected his wife's demotion to their marriage. He had announced to 43 employees that this was personal, that this was punishment. Wendy slowly opened her portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She studied it for a moment, her face revealing nothing. Then she looked up at Williams, her voice steady when she finally spoke. "Do you have anything else to add?" Williams frowned, caught off guard by her calmness. "I think I've been clear. Crystal clear." Wendy turned to Vanessa. "And you? Anything you'd like to contribute to this restructuring?" Vanessa's smile widened. She couldn't resist the opportunity to twist the knife. "Just that we appreciate your flexibility during this transition. Not everyone handles career adjustments with grace. But I'm sure you'll find administrative work suits you. It's less pressure, more appropriate for someone at your stage of life." Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. The cruelty was becoming impossible to ignore. Wendy stood slowly, gathering her materials. For a moment Williams thought she might cry, might storm out, might give him the dramatic reaction he could use to justify everything he'd done. Instead, she walked calmly to where Samuel stood and handed him the paper from her portfolio. "Samuel," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room, "I'm invoking my authority as the founder and majority shareholder of Meridian Holdings to call an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. attendance is mandatory for all board members and executive leadership." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Williams's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Wendy turned to face him, and for the first time her composure cracked. Not into tears but into something harder. Something Williams had never seen before. Tomorrow, Williams. You'll understand everything tomorrow. Until then, I suggest you and Vanessa enjoy your evening. It's the last one you'll have at this company. She walked out of the conference room with her head high, leaving 43 people in stunned silence and one man whose entire world had just begun to crumble beneath his feet. Williams looked at Vanessa, confusion and the first tremors of fear crossing his face. What is she talking about? But Vanessa had no answer. And somewhere in the building, Samuel Okonkwo was already sending messages to the board members, preparing them for what tomorrow would bring. The truth was coming, and it would show no mercy. Williams didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room of the house he thought was his, scrolling through his phone, searching for any information that would explain Wendy's cryptic threat. Vanessa had called him 17 times, her messages increasingly panicked. What did she mean? What does she know? Are we in trouble? He'd stopped responding after the 10th message, because deep in his gut, beneath the layers of pride and resentment, Williams was beginning to understand that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Wendy had left the house shortly after the meeting and hadn't returned. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Williams tried her mother, her brother, even her closest friend Paula. No one would tell him where she was. Paula's response was the coldest. You destroyed her in front of half the company, and now you want to know where she's sleeping? Figure it out yourself, Williams. At 8:45 the next morning, Williams walked into Meridian Holdings with Vanessa beside him. She wore a different power suit, navy this time with gold accessories. She'd spent an hour on her makeup, determined to face whatever was coming with her armor intact. We haven't done anything wrong, she kept repeating, more to herself than to Williams. We followed proper protocols. We documented everything. She can't. Just stop talking, Williams snapped. His nerves were frayed, his confidence shattered. He'd been awake all night, and the only conclusion he'd reached was that he'd been playing a game without knowing all the rules. The executive boardroom was on the top floor, a space Williams had been inside only twice in his career, once during his initial interview and once during a company-wide town hall. As they stepped off the elevator, they were met by Samuel's assistant, a sharp woman named Blessing who directed them to wait in the reception area. Through the glass walls, Williams could see board members arriving, distinguished men and women in their 50s and 60s, carrying briefcases and speaking in low tones. He recognized a few from company literature. Mrs. Florence Adeyemi, Wendy's aunt. Mr. Charles Ease, a prominent banker. Dr. Ngozi Okafor, a former finance minister. And then Wendy arrived. She wore a tailored black suit with a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She carried a leather briefcase Williams had never seen before. She looked different. Not like the woman he'd humiliated yesterday. Not like the wife who'd cooked his meals and ironed his shirts and kept silent about her own achievements. She looked like someone who owned things. Wendy walked past Williams and Vanessa without acknowledging them, entering the boardroom where the board members stood in greeting. The door closed. Williams and Vanessa were left in the reception area with Blessing, who offered them water and stale smiles. At exactly 9 a.m. Blessing's phone buzzed. You may enter now, she said. The boardroom was intimidating by design. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos. A mahogany table that could seat 20. 8 board members sat along one side. Wendy sat at the head of the table, Samuel at her right hand. Williams and Vanessa were directed to 2 chairs facing the entire board. Felt like a trial. Because it was. Wendy spoke first, her voice clear and emotionless. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I've called this emergency meeting to address a matter of gross misconduct involving 2 employees. Williams Adeyemi, operations manager, and Vanessa Okoro, executive assistant. Williams's mouth went dry. Wendy, what is this? Mrs. Florence Adeyemi, Wendy's aunt, cut in sharply. You will address her as Mrs. Adeyemi or as founder. You've lost the privilege of informality. Founder. Vanessa's voice came out as a whisper. What are you talking about? Wendy opened her briefcase and distributed bound documents to each board member. 10 years ago, I established Meridian Holdings using capital from my late father's estate, and a loan from my uncle, Mr. Philip Adeyemi. The company was structured under a family trust to protect assets and maintain operational flexibility. I've served as the beneficial owner and primary decision-maker since inception, while Samuel Okonkwo has served as managing director and public representative. She slid 2 more copies across the table to Williams and Vanessa. Pages 3 through 15 contain the trust documentation, incorporation papers, and shareholder agreements. You'll find my signature as founder and majority shareholder. You'll also find documentation of every major decision made at this company over the past decade. Every hire, every contract, every expansion. Williams's hand shook as he flipped through the papers. His name appeared on page 47. His employment contract. Signed by Samuel. Approved by Wendy. You work for me, Williams, Wendy said, her voice devoid of emotion. You've always worked for me. The salary you earn? I approve it. The car you drive? Purchased it. The house where you live? I own it. Every moment of comfort and success you've experienced in our marriage was built on my work, my sacrifice, and my silence. Why? Williams's voice cracked. Why hide this from me? Because my father taught me to test character before revealing power. He told me that money and success reveal who people truly are. I loved you, Williams. I wanted to believe you loved me for me, not for what I could provide. So I waited. I watched. I hoped. Wendy's composure finally wavered, her eyes glistening. And you showed me exactly who you are. A man so fragile, so insecure, that you celebrated my destruction. A man who brought his mistress into my company and used my resources to humiliate me in front of people I hired and trained. Vanessa tried to speak. Mrs. Adeyemi, I didn't know. You knew enough. Wendy's gaze turned to ice. You knew he was married. You knew you were manipulating a man's insecurities for your own advancement. You participated in a conspiracy to damage my professional reputation, and you did it with cruelty and satisfaction. Dr. Ngozi Okafor leaned forward. We've reviewed the documentation Mr. Okonkwo provided regarding your actions, the fabricated performance complaints, the coordinated campaign to undermine Mrs. Adeyemi's authority, the public humiliation conducted yesterday. These actions constitute gross misconduct, abuse of company resources, and violation of our ethics policies. Mr. Charles Ease added. They also constitute betrayal of the highest order. This company was built on integrity. You've demonstrated none. Wendy pulled out 2 envelopes. Williams Adeyemi, Vanessa Okoro. You are hereby terminated from Meridian Holdings effective immediately. You will surrender all company property, including phones, laptops, access cards, and vehicles. You will be escorted from the building by security within the hour. You are barred from company premises and prohibited from contacting current employees. Violation of these terms will result in legal action. Williams found his voice, panic rising in his chest. Wendy, please. I made a mistake. I was angry, I was stupid, but we can fix this. We're married. You can't just. You're right, Wendy interrupted. We are married. For now. My lawyer will be serving you divorce papers tomorrow morning. The house, the car, the savings accounts, all of it was mine to begin with. You'll receive whatever the court determines is fair, but I suspect it won't be much. Adultery and conspiracy tend not to reflect well in divorce proceedings. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't destroy people's lives because your marriage failed. Mrs. Florence slammed her hand on the table. Sit down. Vanessa sat. You destroyed your own lives, Mrs. Florence continued, her voice sharp as broken glass. My niece gave you opportunities, trust, and generosity. You repaid her with betrayal and cruelty. You celebrated her pain. You mocked her suffering. And now you face consequences. That's not destruction. That's justice. Security entered the room. 2 large men Williams recognized from the lobby. They stood by the door waiting. Wendy stood, gathering her materials. She looked at Williams one last time, and in her eyes, he saw something that broke him more than anger ever could: indifference. I forgave you months ago, Williams. When I found the messages. When I discovered the affair. I forgave you because I wanted to save our marriage. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't excuse what you've done. You wanted me small. You wanted me diminished. You wanted me to know my place. She walked toward the door, pausing beside his chair. Now you know yours. As Williams and Vanessa were escorted from the building, their personal items hastily packed into cardboard boxes, 43 employees watched from windows and doorways. The same people who'd witnessed the humiliation yesterday now watched the reckoning. Samuel stood in Wendy's office later that afternoon, watching her stare out at the Lagos skyline. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. Wendy was quiet for a long moment. Empty. Relieved. Heartbroken. All at once. "You did the right thing." "Did I?" Wendy turned to face him, tears finally falling freely. "I built all of this, Samuel. I worked myself to exhaustion. I sacrificed sleep, friendships, parts of myself I can't get back. And for what? To watch the man I loved celebrate my destruction because his pride mattered more than our vows." Samuel had no answer. Because there was no good answer. There was only the truth, that Wendy had done everything right, and it still hadn't been enough to save her marriage from a man who valued ego over love. "Go home," Samuel said finally. "Take time. Heal. The company will be here when you're ready." Wendy nodded, gathering her things. But as she drove to her mother's house, because she couldn't face the empty mansion yet, she carried the weight of every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of silence that had led to this. The truth had set her free. But freedom, she was learning, could feel an awful lot like loss. Months later, Lagos remained indifferent to the ruins of Williams Adeyemi's life. He lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Surulere, a neighborhood far from the luxury of Lekki. The walls needed paint. The plumbing rattled. The electricity cut out 3 times a week. It was the kind of place Williams had left behind years ago, back when he was young and hungry and convinced that success was inevitable. Now he knew better. The divorce had been finalized 8 weeks ago. Wendy had been more generous than she needed to be. Her lawyer had made that clear. Williams received a settlement of 8 million naira, a used Honda Civic, and furniture from their guest room. In court, Wendy's legal team had presented evidence of the affair, the conspiracy, and the public humiliation. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Afolayan, had been unimpressed. "Mr. Adeyemi," she'd said, peering over her reading glasses, "you conspired to professionally destroy the woman who built your lifestyle. You used her company's resources to humiliate her. And you did all of this while maintaining an extramarital affair with her subordinate. That you're receiving anything at all is a testament to Mrs. Adeyemi's grace, not your entitlement." Williams's mother, Mama Elizabeth, had attended the proceedings. Afterward, she'd refused to speak to him for 3 weeks. When she finally called, her voice was cold with disappointment. "I raised you better than this," she'd said. "Your father worked 3 jobs to send you to university. He taught you about honor, about dignity, about treating your wife like a queen. And you threw it all away for pride and a woman with no morals." "Mama, I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was a choice. Multiple choices. You chose betrayal over loyalty. You chose cruelty over compassion. You chose that Vanessa woman over your own wife." "I was angry. Wendy made me feel small. So you made yourself smaller." Mama Elizabeth's voice broke. "You had a good woman, Williams. A woman who loved you enough to hide her own success to protect your pride. And you punished her for it. Finding work had been impossible. Word had spread through Lagos's corporate networks with the speed of wildfire. Williams had applied to 43 companies. He'd received 3 interviews, all of which ended the same way. References were checked, calls were made, and suddenly positions were no longer available. The unemployment officer who processed his registration had looked at his CV with recognition. "Meridian Holdings," she'd said. "Didn't you work there?" "Yes. I heard about what happened. Shame." She'd stamped his forms without another word. Eventually, Williams found work at a small import-export firm in Ikeja. The pay was less than half what he'd earned at Meridian. His title was Logistics Coordinator, a fancy name for someone who tracked shipments and filed paperwork. His boss was 26 years old, freshly returned from Canada with an MBA and no patience for excuses. Every day was a reminder of everything he'd lost. Vanessa had disappeared from his life as quickly as she'd entered it. 2 weeks after the termination, she'd called him from a number he didn't recognize. "I'm leaving Lagos," she'd said, her voice tight. "My cousin has a business in Port Harcourt. I'm going to help her. Vanessa, we can figure this out together. We can." "There is no we, Williams. There never was. I thought you had power. I thought you could help my career. You were just a bitter man who blamed his wife for his own failures. So that's it? You used me." "We used each other," Vanessa corrected. "The difference is I'm honest about it. Good luck, Williams. You're going to need it." She'd hung up. Williams never heard from her again. He'd learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd struggled to find work in Port Harcourt too. The story had followed her. Eventually, she'd left Nigeria entirely, supposedly working at a hotel in Dubai. Williams didn't know if that was true. He didn't care anymore. The worst part wasn't the job or the apartment or even the divorce. The worst part was the isolation. Friends who'd once filled his calendar with invitations now screened his calls. Family members treated him with polite distance. Even his younger brother Kenneth, who'd always looked up to him, had told him bluntly, "You need to fix yourself, bro. I can't respect what you did." Williams's only consistent companion was regret. It lived in his chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing day. One Saturday afternoon he saw her. Wendy was at the Palms shopping mall in Lekki, walking with her mother and a group of women Williams didn't recognize. She wore a flowing white dress and gold jewelry. She looked radiant, free. When she laughed at something Mama Ruth said, the sound carried across the courtyard, and Williams felt something in his chest crack open. He watched from a distance as they entered a bookstore. Through the window he saw Wendy signing books, her book. She'd written a memoir about building Meridian Holdings, about entrepreneurship, about resilience. The line of readers wrapped around the store's interior. Williams stood frozen on the other side of the glass, invisible, irrelevant. When Wendy emerged an hour later, arms full of shopping bags, Williams made the mistake of approaching. "Wendy," he called out. She stopped, turned. Her expression shifted from surprise to something carefully neutral. Mama Ruth's face hardened immediately. "Williams." Wendy's voice was polite but distant, the way you might greet a stranger. "You look well," he managed. "I am well." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Williams forced out the words he'd practiced 1,000 times in his empty apartment. "I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong. I was cruel. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I couldn't handle being married to someone extraordinary. And I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. And I'd do anything to take it back." Wendy studied him for a long moment. Mama Ruth crossed her arms, ready to intervene, but Wendy gently touched her mother's shoulder. "I believe you," Wendy said finally. "I believe you're sorry. I believe you regret it. But Williams, regret doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't erase the humiliation you put me through. It doesn't give me back the marriage I grieved while you were with Vanessa. I know. But maybe we could." "No." The word was gentle but absolute. "We couldn't. I've moved on, Williams. I've healed. I've rebuilt. And I've learned that my worth isn't tied to making others feel comfortable with my success. I won't make myself smaller ever again. Not for any man." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice softened with something that might have been compassion. "I hope you find peace, Williams. I hope you learn from this. But you'll learn it without me." Wendy walked away, her mother and friends surrounding her like a protective cocoon. Williams stood alone in the parking lot, watching her disappear into the Lagos afternoon, carrying a life he was no longer part of. 3 months later, Williams sat in a church service his mother had insisted he attend. The pastor spoke about consequences and redemption, about how some mistakes leave scars that never fully heal, but can teach us to live differently. "Consequences aren't always punishment," Pastor David said from the pulpit. "Sometimes they're teachers. They show us the truth about who we've been so we can choose who we want to become." After the service, Williams's sister Clara cornered him in the parking lot. She'd been avoiding him since the divorce, disappointed and ashamed of what her brother had become. "Kenneth told me you're working in Ikeja now," she said. "Yeah. Pays the bills." "Barely." Clara studied him. "Are you learning anything?" How to be humble. Williams attempted a bitter laugh. No. Are you learning why you did it? Because until you understand that, really understand it, you're just a cautious version of the same man. Williams drove home in silence, Clara's words echoing. That night, he sat down with a notebook and forced himself to write honestly for the first time in his life. He wrote about his father's expectations. About growing up in a home where men were supposed to provide, supposed to lead, supposed to be the source of family pride. He wrote about the shame he'd felt when friends made jokes about successful wives. He wrote about how Vanessa had made him feel powerful by making Wendy seem weak. He wrote until his hand cramped, until tears blurred the ink, until the truth was undeniable on the page. He'd been so terrified of being seen as less than that he'd destroyed someone who'd only ever wanted him to be enough. Meanwhile, Wendy's life had transformed in ways she'd never imagined. Meridian Holdings expanded into 3 new countries. Her book became a bestseller. She was invited to speak at conferences across Africa about entrepreneurship, women in business, and corporate leadership. Universities requested her as a guest lecturer. But the achievement that meant most to her was smaller and more personal. She'd established the Wendy Adeyemi Foundation for Women in Business, offering mentorship, microloans, and training to young women entrepreneurs. Every Saturday, she met with a new cohort women who reminded her of herself at 25. Brilliant, ambitious, and terrified of being too much. Don't shrink yourself, she told them during one session, her voice firm with conviction. Don't hide your intelligence to protect someone's ego. Don't apologize for your success. The right partner will celebrate your rise, not resent it. And if they can't, that's their limitation, not yours. One young woman, Faith, raised her hand. But Mrs. Adeyemi, what if we want to get married? What if men are intimidated? Wendy smiled sadly. Then they're the wrong men. You're building empires, ladies. You need partners who want to build with you, not tear you down to feel taller. On the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, Mama Ruth threw a small celebration at her home. Just family and Wendy's closest friends. They called it a freedom party. To my daughter, Mama Ruth toasted, raising her glass of wine, who learned that peace costs more than any marriage worth losing. Wendy laughed, surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was. But later, alone in her childhood bedroom, she allowed herself to grieve one last time for the marriage she'd wanted, the future she'd imagined, the man Williams could have been if he'd loved her more than he'd feared his own inadequacy. The tears came hard and cleansing. When they finally stopped, Wendy felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, it would probably never fully disappear, but because she'd finally accepted that some endings are necessary. Some losses are the price of self-respect. Williams never remarried. He spent years in therapy, working through the entitlement and insecurity that had poisoned his marriage. He rebuilt relationships with his family slowly, proving through consistent humility that he was trying to change. But the consequences remained. Job opportunities stayed limited. His reputation never fully recovered. Friends treated him with caution. And every successful woman he met reminded him of what he'd destroyed. On what would have been their 10th wedding anniversary, Williams visited the church where they'd married. He sat in the same pew where he'd waited for Wendy to walk down the aisle, young and hopeful and convinced their love could survive anything. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty sanctuary. "I'm so sorry." The words echoed and faded. The church offered no absolution, because some apologies come too late. Some consequences last forever. Not as punishment, but as permanent reminders of the person we chose to be when character mattered most. Wendy never heard that apology. She was too busy living, building, mentoring, loving herself in ways she'd once sacrificed for a man who'd needed her small to feel big. She had rebuilt her life on truth, on strength, on the understanding that her worth had never been negotiable. Williams would spend the rest of his rebuilding his on regret, learning that the hardest person to earn forgiveness from is yourself. Some love stories end in separation. Some marriages die from betrayal. But the lesson remains constant and unforgiving. Actions have consequences. And some consequences don't end. They teach. And Williams Adeyemi would be learning for the rest of his life. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal, and tell me where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.